Welcome to Board Gems. In this video, I'll be comparing two editions of the classic and highly regarded strategy board game Puerto Rico, designed by Andreas Seyfarth and published by Alea. There have been a number of editions over the years. These are the oldest and newest. On the left is the English edition of the 2002 printing of Puerto Rico. This was part of their original big box series. After that, there was an anniversary edition with metal coins, very cool, that came out I think around 2011. In the late 2010s, there was sort of a retail version of that. Alea started a revised big box series of games, and there was a limited release in 2020, I think. Not many copies escaped into the wild. From my memory, there was a lot of feedback, shall we say, about releasing a colonial themed game in 2020. I don't know about other languages, but the English editions were only briefly on the market and then removed, and later on was replaced by this one, Puerto Rico 1897, a thoughtful reimagining of the setting, mechanically the same, but set in that sweet spot between when Puerto Rico was granted some autonomy by the Spanish Empire in 1897, and then in 1898 in the Treaty of Paris, and then Puerto Rico became an American territory. Jason Perez, Shelf Stories on YouTube, was the person responsible for this thoughtful remake. He has since disavowed it, which I'm not going to get into the politics of it. I will just say that he did an amazing job. The original Puerto Rico was number 7 in Alea's original big box series, and the reprint was a later number. In the revised big box series, it's number 4. Both printings, both the brief colonial printing as well as this reimagining, are both numbered 4. You can look at the sides to see what it would look like on your bookshelf, although you might have to tilt your neck. They're the same box size, which is standard rectangle like you might see from Hans im Gluck or Lookout or a number of other companies, but slightly thinner. Standard for Alea. I will say the new edition's cardboard seems to be a little bit weaker, so very easy to dent. The original printing would have been in German, and then Rio Grande did an English printing of it. This new edition, published by Ravensburger, has English and French. So all the buildings and everything, they have English on one side and French on the other. I'll take the opportunity to mention that Puerto Rico 1897 had a number of printings, many of which had serious flaws, mistakes in printing, incorrect components. I got this edition in 2024, and it has no problems that I notice. The original had a generic plastic insert, wells for everything. The new edition has a unnecessary cardboard insert. I guess it makes the outer cardboard a little bit stronger. Comes with a bunch of plastic baggies, which I like, although the baggies are quite small for the components. On the right, that's pretty standard nowadays, and I like it. The only real downside is you have to put the boards at the bottom. So basically you have to take out all the components before you get at the boards. I kind of like taking the boards out first, because you can get them set up in their proper place and then deal with the components. Minor thing, of course. Very standard Alea style of rulebook, which has sidebars if you're already familiar with the game and just need to look up some quick detail. Those classic Rio Grande rulebooks where the translation is accurate, but the English could have been done better, like misplaced commas and parentheses and whatnot. There is one rule/component change that I noticed in the new edition. The game comes with extra victory points, which are not spares. You're supposed to use all the victory points in a 5-player game. So this edition, and not the previous editions that I could tell, the game will last slightly longer possibly in a 5-player game, because running out of victory points is one of the endgame conditions. The rules are described pretty much exactly the same, although a bit more natural language. Of course, it has details on the expansions in the back pages, and in the back, nice historical notes explaining the reasoning behind some of the changes. I want to complain a tiny bit. All games are abstracted. You're not assigning shifts to your workers or letting them take bathroom breaks. At some point, you're taking a higher level of view. And in Puerto Rico's higher level view, you don't pay wages. But Jason Perez, I think, really wanted to say that the workers should be paid thematically and encourages players to experiment with variants that include paying the workers' wages. I'm just going to go ahead ahead and suggest players don't do that. The game is mostly balanced on a knife's edge already. I wouldn't make huge changes to it like that. Player boards, same deal. 12 spaces for plantations/estates, what they call them in the new edition, and 12 spaces for city buildings. And on the side, a reminder of the roles and what they do. All 5 player boards in the old edition are the same. In the new edition, the player boards are different. You see they have different character portraits. And actually, on the back, they have different character portraits. I mean, that's really nice. I like that. But ideally, that's because you want to choose, right, which character do you want to play as. And that doesn't really work here because this side you're looking at now is the French side. So French players are going to play with one side, English players are going to play with the other side. You're not really given a choice. But I mean, I understand why they would do that, of course. This board stores the different buildings that you can buy during the game, columns in the old, rows in the new. There are spaces for expansion buildings. You see those have red outlines, red text. They're optional, of course, but it's nice to have the space for them. You can see a typical base game of Puerto Rico looks like this. And you can see the original just has text. Very clear, of course, but not much to look at. It's nice to have the illustrations. And in an earlier printing of this, the buildings had illustrations but did not have text explaining them, which means you had to constantly look up in the rule book what the buildings did until you've internalized them. And there are a lot of buildings to internalize. These tiles represent crops that you plant. You'll notice the indigo has been replaced with fruit. Mechanically, it's the same. The tiles in the original are really thin, pretty standard for Alea, slightly thicker in the newer edition. Unfortunately, the quarry tiles have the same back as the crop tiles. You'll never mix them in with the crop tiles, you keep them separate. The original edition did it right, to have a different back so you could keep those separate. No difference at all in the colonists. They're brown discs painted very slightly differently, but same size, I think. The crops are at the top. You'll see that blue indigo has been replaced by green fruit. And in the original, you had light brown tobacco and dark brown coffee. I'm glad they just made the coffee black in the new edition. Money and victory points. The original was more ornate. I kind of liked the look of the old coins, if I'm honest. They made them more generic in the new edition, but it's fine and very clear. On the top are the ships. Of course, I like the fact that they actually look like ships that you're putting things down on top of in the new edition, although I find the outlines to be not super clear. The trading house in the center is similar, but a bit more compact in terms of representing sale price. I like what they did there. And the colonist ship has become the ... It's the work register, because instead of colonists, they're workers that you're hiring. I would have liked for there to have been text on it though, and they could have had English on one side and French on the other. Roles. Very slight changes. The mayor becomes the recruiter, the settler becomes the planter, and the prospectors become adventurers. The new illustrations are nice, and they have symbols on the bottom which match up with symbols on the buildings to remind you when those buildings' special abilities are activated. In the original, it was in text. The new edition comes with 4 expansions, and on the bottom right is the 3rd expansion, the Smuggler. It's an extra role that players can pick, which messes up the state of the board, being able to clear out trade goods or colonists/workers and then taking some for yourself. And the other expansions. On the top are the new buildings, and this would probably be welcome for many modern hobbyists, because it makes every game like the first game. You have all the buildings, the old and the new. At the beginning of the game, players draft these buildings to add to the central board, so every time you play, you're potentially using a different set of buildings. People are going to like the replayability of it, which is such a big selling point in the hobby nowadays. I don't like the idea of every time you play looking at the buildings and figuring out what they do, and it delays starting the game while you're drafting these. Ugh. Now expansion 2, which are the red buildings, are just extra buildings. You can just add them with the base games. If you want more variety, or if your group is just in a rut, you can add some extra buildings. Doesn't take away anything from the base game, adds more. And also includes the idea of citizens, which I think in one of the earlier editions were called nobles. A different type of worker that is also worth a victory point at the end. And expansion 4, the festival, gives you public goals. If you are able to meet the requirement, you get the listed reward. Just something public for all the players to go for. Again, can add variety because every time you play, the goals might be different. Thanks for watching and listening. Remember, older games like Puerto Rico don't stop being good just because newer games come out. But newer editions, that's the way to go, eh? Alright, take care.